This is a tutorial on the Vacant Land Purchase Agreement, Car Form VLPA, revised July 2024, and we will go through it very quickly. We'll start here at the top with the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship. You'll put your info, your client's info, both of you will sign. You do nothing on page 2, and then here we are on page 1 of the purchase agreement itself. Now we start by putting the date we're preparing the form here, the name of the buyer, and if the buyer is an entity like a corporation or LLC, go ahead and check the appropriate box. Now, land often won't have a street address. So the most important way to identify land is to put a parcel number here, which can be found on an MLS listing, in the tax info through the MLS like Realist, or on a property tax bill, or from the seller. But either way, you'll want to find the assessor's parcel number, and there may be more than one if the land has already been divided. So there may be multiple parcel numbers. That's the most important. Now, to put an address, sometimes I see agents will put like 0 in the MLS, and they'll write 0 Main Street or something to that effect. And you could just put a street name here because this is less important. I mean, if you have it, great, but if you don't, you want to make sure that you have a parcel number. That's the most important. And then you can put something here. And they actually put a third line to identify it, further described as, and you can put a legal description here or some other identifying information. But parcel number is definitely the number one way to identify the property. Then we go down to the confirmation of agency. So this really is the same as what's on the residential purchase agreement. You'll put in the brokerage name for the seller, brokerage name for the buyer, the listing agent's name, the buyer's agent's name, the respective license numbers. You'll check the boxes below, who represents whom. If it's a dual agent, you'll check the box over here. But it's pretty straightforward. Now let's get down into the terms and conditions. Now I put 500,000 here. You'll type in a numerical figure. Land is often cash, and you check the box here if it's all cash. Sometimes it's not. We're going to pretend like we're financing in this example. Now for close of escrow, I put 45 days. So of course this is personal preference, but with land, there's a lot of due diligence required in land that could take some time because really depending on if the land is within city limits or often it's an unincorporated area, which goes back to the county. That means a buyer needs to contact the county. They need to look at a county zoning map. There are usually letters or some sort of code that you can pull up as a key in a very lengthy notebook you'll find on the county's website. And it'll be a guide that will show you what you can and cannot do based on the zoning or the area. I mean, it has everything you could think of, from the size of the property to setbacks to what sort of livestock you can have on there. But there are other issues too, like is it in a flood zone? So, I mean, all this needs to be properly researched. So how much time does the buyer need to make sure that are there utilities running to the property? How much, how much will it cost to run utilities that aren't already on the property limits? So how much time do you need? That's what's going to dictate what you're going to put here for the escrow period. Escrow period, I leave alone. Whatever, 3 calendar days after it's been signed and sent. I mean, fine. I mean, there's really, sometimes agents like to really squeeze. I guess there are scenarios when you need to shorten this, but I'm showing you how I would fill this out, and I wouldn't bother with this. EMD, earnest money deposit, or initial deposit amount, 1 to 3% of the sales price. I have 3% here as an example. Just put in whatever you want, then move on. Increased deposit, just skip that. You don't even need to worry about it. Loan amount, we're going to put, we're putting 100,000 down, and we're getting 400,000 financed. Now, getting loans for land is more difficult. I know U.S. Bank, that's my go-to lender for a land loan. As it stands, I mean, I know there are other lenders out there, but U.S. Bank is great. They have a loan rep down here in San Diego County that's extremely knowledgeable. And if you find a loan officer at any bank that does lending on land, they're going to be very helpful, or at least they should be. If not, find someone else. But also, we're not going to use a bank in this scenario. We're doing something else that's fairly common in land purchases, and that is seller financing. When I check this box, it creates a seller financing addendum that's attached after this form, and I'll explain. I'm not going to go through that because that's lengthy and there's a lot of variables, but I will talk more about it to give you some direction on how you can do seller financing if that's going to be part of your transaction. So we're going to pretend like we're getting a loan from the seller financing for $400,000, okay? And then, so this is going to automatically reconcile itself right there. We move on. We're the buyer's agent writing an offer. We're going to check this box and include an SPBB form, and I'm going to ask for whatever's on my buyer representation agreement. I'm going to ask for 2.5% or whatever it is on my SPBB form, which is now incorporated in this agreement. Then we're going to move on. All this says that we're going to have a proof of funds for a down payment or some sort of lender pre-qualification letter, if applicable, that's going to be attached with the offer. It really, when you send an offer, you should always have a proof of funds with it, quite frankly. Now, by default, there's these contingencies I just left on here. You got loan, appraisal. Maybe appraisal is not required. If you're doing seller financing, you've already had a conversation with the listing agent and you've already had kind of a casual talk about what's needed. If you're doing seller financing, do you need an appraisal? Does the seller really care? Do you care that much? You might, but is it necessary? No. So you might just check this box and remove the appraisal contingency. If you have another bank involved, you're definitely going to have an appraisal contingency, like let's say US Bank's doing the financing. And if you're paying cash, you just check this box because you don't need a loan contingency. You don't need an appraisal contingency. You're paying cash. And if you're paying cash, you could do a 7-day escrow if you want. I mean, that's at that point, that's not what's slowing the escrow down. What's slowing an escrow down is how much time you, or I should say your buyer, needs to do the due diligence and make sure that they can use the land for its intended use, because many, many times buyers purchase land and they find out that they can't do whatever they want it on. I mean, even the slope that for your driveway is, the degrees of angle of slope is going to be regulated by the county, in an unincorporated county. And they may even ask, I mean, there's so much that goes into it. I can tell you that I've dealt with this sort of stuff over the years, and it gets you can go down the rabbit hole. All right, construction loan, I mean, if you need it, this is encompassed by the loan contingency. I don't even know why they parsed that out. It was unnecessary. But this is important. Investigation. So here I'm just leaving it as it is. I already told you if it's cash, you can check these boxes, but leave the rest of this or add more time if you need it. This is all just for your investigations. And then we're skipping through 7 days for seller disclosures. I mean, we're not doing anything here. That's it. We're skipping through. I'm showing you how I would fill this out if I were doing it here. Today, writing up an offer for a client or even myself purchasing land, this is what I would be doing. I would scroll right down to here, natural hazard disclosure. Now, you bet I'm going to have this included. Why? Because that's the fastest way to get basic info on a property about the fire hazard, about dam inundation, meaning if a dam up, at a higher elevation breaks, is my property going to be flooded? Am I going to be washed out to sea? It's also going to show if I'm in a FEMA flood zone. I mean, there's certain things that you can instantly find out with an NHD that's, approximately $100 and highly recommended. Environmental survey, I mean, things like that, you'll know if you need it. I mean, on most transactions, you don't. And we come down to escrow fees. I'm writing this up in the Southern California way, what's typical and customary that you see in Southern California, and that's each pay their own escrow fee and the seller pay the title policy. Just do whatever's customary for your area. Of course, Northern California varies county to county. Yeah, if you need, they have this by default if it even applies. I should say government point of sale requirements. I skipped past that, and by the way, if you see something that you want more info about that I might have skipped, just leave a comment. But there are a few of these point of sale requirements for land. If there is, you can put this in, but I would leave this blank. Again, I'm showing you exactly how I would fill this out, and I'm very seasoned in this. So county transfer, city, I'd have the seller pay. City is probably not even going to be applicable if it's in an unincorporated county where a lot of vacant land is located, but we're going to have this just in case. HOA is possible, actually, if you're buying a vacant lot in an HOA community, like a gated community. So it has its place here. But we're not. We're buying it out in the middle of nowhere. So I didn't put anything here. Now, if there is an HOA, go ahead and check seller right there. Private transfer, very rare. You're going to need that. Very rare you're going to need that. Let me enunciate better. I'm starting to mumble here. Okay, now in this area, you can add other reports. And gosh, I mean, you can do percolation tests. You can do feasibility studies for grading. I mean, there's so much you can add here. I'm not going to bother. You know why? Because I have my inspection period up above. Now, if you want the seller to pay for it, by all means, put something in here. If you want the seller to pay for a particular report or something, go ahead and add that here. And this is where it's going to be. And you can even write in additional information down here. But if you want the seller to pay for something that's going to help with the buyer's due diligence, well, this is the speak now or forever hold your peace section, because you have this section plus other terms where you can write it in. I'm skipping past here because I'm not incorporating it. Now, of course, read through this, and if anything pertains to your purchase, the land you're looking at, by all means, check the box and add it to incorporate it with your offer. I'm skipping through here. I didn't even check these boxes. This is the zip form application, this wolf forms, whatever they're calling it. I mean, it just keeps changing, but our form application where we draft these car forms, this automatically checks the box for you. Okay. This is all just expanded verbiage about terms that we've talked about for the most part. So I'm just scrolling through, and of course the buyer is initialing every page. If you want to read it about what if this and answers to, should this happen, then what? If this happens, here's the appropriate steps. That's what all this is. And as a broker, I'm constantly reading all this stuff to solve problems because you're analyzing every sentence. But for the sake of us writing an offer, I'm showing you I'd scroll through all of this. What are we on? Page 13 of 17. This thing is just unnecessarily long, to be honest. But we're going to make it easy, right? So liquidated damages, this is where if the buyer breaches, they can lose their deposit. I mean, I recommend both parties initial here. And a second time on this page, 14. And by default, there's a mediation clause in case something goes wrong so the parties don't sue each other. And then down here, an arbitration clause so that if mediation fails, well, you can go to arbitration. Your client and the seller can go to arbitration and solve their problem without having to go to litigation. And then we're done. I mean, if it's an entity buyer, like we talked about, corporation or LLC, check this box, put the name of the authorized signer in. I mean, if not, you're just going to have the buyer sign it, and that's it. Now, of course, your information down here, buyer's brokerage. Now, let me scroll down. So there's inspection advisory. I mean, this, of course, is just saying, hey, buyer, you need to look into all this stuff. I mean, you need to do your proper due diligence and research about what you're getting into. But let me get down here. Oh, my gosh. So, okay, so we have the inspection advisory. That's great. We have the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller and fair housing. So these are just advisories and statutory verbiage, wire fraud advisory. I mean, they're good measures, but gosh, this is excessive. California consumer privacy. So we're just going to scroll through. Okay, now we come to the seller financing addendum. Now, these terms here effectively create a note. Okay, let me explain something here. If the seller is doing a carryback, also known as seller financing, there's a couple ways to go about it. I have done a transaction in the past where I've filled this out with the terms in which the seller becomes the lender. The seller is a mortgage lender, okay? The most recent transaction that had seller financing, the seller did a 7-figure carryback for my client. I represented the buyer, and there was seller financing in it, and the amount the seller carried back was a lot. It was millions. So did we use this? No. we had an attorney draft a proper note, because we're not messing around and we don't want to screw something up with millions of dollars on the line. So like I said, I've done a transaction where I've done this. Now, I filled this out, and then we handed it off to an escrow company that had a note, and they prepared a note. And really, looking back, that was very much a DIY type of seller carryback where everyone chipped in. I'm very knowledgeable, so I was able to draft this. I've had a mortgage company in the past. I've done mortgages in the past. I've been a broker for many years, over 20. So I filled this out properly, although some agents might make a mistake. This escrow we worked with, they draft notes all the time. The owner of the escrow company assisted doing this. Would I recommend that? Probably not. That's an advanced move. I would recommend just finding an attorney, even an inexpensive one, and saying, listen, we need to draft a note to record a deed of trust on title for seller financing, and a real estate attorney is going to be able to do this in their sleep. This is second nature for a real estate attorney. This is very simple stuff for them. So I recommend getting a real estate attorney involved and having them draft a note and preparing a deed of trust that escrow is going to record. And it's really simple, and that's what I'd recommend for seller financing. So you can use this, and this could also be used. You could just fill this out and later transpose the information here onto an actual note prepared by an attorney. But I'm just telling you now, as someone that's done it different ways over the years, that I would not use this. Quite frankly, I would not use this. This is a DIY solution. There's nothing wrong with DIY, but it comes with inherent risk. That's it. Look at all this. You got to know what you're doing to fill this out. And it's a 4-page form, SFA. Okay. I hope this helps you draft a vacant land purchase agreement. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. Thank you for watching.